I think people forget that the fabric of America is woven by immigrants, and just down to what's happening in the country right now with this festive World Cup. It's very much a fabric of our society.
Yes, times are bad. The system is complicated. It's not insurmountable. Don't panic. Talk to a great lawyer like Tahmina, and you will be able to navigate it. You will be able to navigate it. It's just scary out there, but it's not insurmountable.
America is still the place where you can succeed. You just have to make sure your paperwork is stronger than ever. And it is possible. So I think if you don't have hope, you can't move forward. You have to have a thick skin and you have to work much harder than before.
Well, I think the big misconception that a regular person in America or Europe or, lots of other places has is when they think immigration, they're probably thinking of borders. And so I feel like that's something that is both a challenge and an opportunity, which is America takes its attractiveness to immigrants for granted. This is just a large, complicated bureaucratic system kind of turning the crank day by day. Like, it's not personal. There's a lot of things out there that are personal. This is not one of them. But I don't know how compelling that is for someone who's in the middle of it.
Mm-hmm. Today, we want to explore what happens when immigration policy meets real life and how people build lives, careers, and communities inside systems that are constantly evolving. So without further ado, let's dive in. And today we are thrilled to welcome Doug Rand and Tahmina Watson. Doug, Tahmina, thank you both for joining us. And it's wonderful to have you here.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you for having us.
So Doug, can you introduce yourself, your work, and what brought you into immigration policy?
Sure. I'll try to do it briefly. I kind of got into immigration policy unintentionally. I had been an entrepreneur. I was interested in policy. I lucked out after graduate school into a 1-year internship in the Obama White House that turned into a 6-year adventure. And when they brought me on board at the Office of Science and Technology Policy there, my marching orders were to help start a new initiative to benefit startups in the United States. It's very broad, but I thought I'd be working on exclusively the things you'd expect startups would care about when it comes to the federal government. I need more access to capital. I need less red tape. I need a more reliable regulatory environment, what have you, just like broad economic things. And what happened within 2 seconds of me starting to talk to actual people in the actual tech and startup ecosystems, they said, "Oh, you're from the federal government. You say you want to help. Well, can you fix immigration? Because that's our biggest pain point." I said, "Oh, I didn't know I was coming here to work on immigration, but that sound I'm hearing the signal. It's not it's pretty strong." And so my joke that's not at all funny is that I learned that the Department of Homeland Security is the accidental regulator of global talent. And so if we care about innovation, if we care about economic growth, we care about a lot of other things in the United States, of course, we better be paying attention to our immigration system and some of the unintended consequences of it being too complicated and not welcoming. So slowly but surely, I started working on immigration policy. That was very exciting for those 6 years in the Obama administration. And then outside of government, during Trump 1.0, I co-founded a startup called Boundless that at the time helped people mostly obtain green cards more affordably. Now it's all kinds of other things. Since I left to go back into government during the 4 years of the Biden administration, I was a senior advisor at U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, the legal immigration part of DHS. And now for the first time, I'm in philanthropy, also working on immigration through other means at the Talent Mobility Fund, which is part of Renaissance Philanthropy.
Wow, this is such an impressive journey. And now I'd like to ask Tahmina if you can introduce yourself, your work, and your journey into immigration law as well.
So I'm the founder of Watson Immigration Law in Seattle, Washington. I moved here 21 years ago. And I was a barrister in the UK when I moved here, which really meant nothing in the United States at the time.
Did you wear the wig, the white wig?
I did wear the wig and gown. I did. I was a newly qualified barrister. So, I moved here and I'd say the word barrister and I'd have to really say, no, I do not make coffee. I'm not a barista.
I see you. I see you at the bar.
So I took the New York bar exams and I live in Washington State. So it sort of narrowed the areas of law that I could practice. And immigration kept following me. But of all the areas of law that I did not want to practice, immigration was at the top of the list. I did not want to practice immigration law. But then came the fifth job, and I really wasn't having a lot of luck. And I thought, well, okay, I'll do this for 5 years, and I'll wave into Washington. And I started practicing immigration law on day one. I was so grateful. I kept saying, why was I fighting this? I was born to practice immigration law, and I haven't looked back since. So that was my journey into immigration law. But what's interesting is that I started my own firm, and between 2006 and 2008, I was working with somebody else. But it was the middle of the recession at the time, and people were being laid off. And that's where this journey of startup visa policy really shaped my career. I had just started and I was helping people with their visas so they can remain in the US, and simultaneously looking at why can't we change policy so that it can match those who want to stay in the US with the modern systems of working on startups. And eventually Doug's path and my path had sort of intersected many moons ago for these types of reasons.
We may think this is a very isolated, very specific area, but actually talking to both of you, we know that everything is intertwined from a policy level, but also work, strategic decision at the level of the companies. So can you clarify a little bit and develop it?
Yeah. So I think the misconception I had, and probably what others may have, is that immigration might be just about asylum law and just about humanitarian issues. But what I learned very quickly was that immigration is so much more than just humanitarian issues. It's about the businesses. It's about the jobs that are being created. And when I realized I'm working with such talented people, I don't have to touch an asylum case to actually be able to practice immigration law. I realized that it touches every aspect of society, whether you're going to your doctor, they might be on a visa. If you're going to your accountant, they may be on a visa. Whether you're getting in an Uber, whether you're going to the grocery store, whether you're picking that, going to get that apple from the grocery store. Immigration is intertwined in every aspect of our lives. And when I realized that I am touching all of these different industries and different avenues, and I'm making an impact, that's what I really wanted to do in life, is have an impact on humans. Not just paper push as a lawyer in a transactional situation where I would never see the end of a case. And so that's what I think immigration is really about. It's economic policy that not everybody thinks about as immigration policy.
Would you say, Doug, that there are similar misconceptions when it comes to immigration policies as well?
Well, I think the big misconception that a regular person in America or Europe or, lots of other places has is when they think immigration, they're probably thinking of borders. If they give it a second thought, they'll realize oh yeah, there's lots of immigrants in my community from lots of walks of life, doing lots of different kinds of jobs and contributing in lots of different ways. But, sometimes I've been, and this is a very nerdy fantasy, but I kind of wish that immigration weren't its own kind of policy topic because it contains so many multitudes of things. I wish, when we talked about economic growth and innovation, there was an immigration piece of that. I wish when we talked about our humanitarian obligations and global affairs, there was an immigration piece of it. I wish when we talked about law enforcement, what's wise and unwise uses of our law enforcement budgets, there was an immigration component, because it really is a very horizontal thing. It's about, it touches everything. And in some ways it's run coherently from a policy perspective, but in other ways it's like Tahmina said, it's like different continents that don't have a great deal to do with each other all the time.
And since you walk us through your journey from startup world and broader understanding of the economic system, what is one of your take on this experience in immigration policy and slightly narrower area, even though it's connected to everything else?
Man, I don't even know where to start. I mean, I guess, all right, here's something I could say is that sometimes, like the times we're living in right now, there is sort of a very deliberate attempt by political leadership to persecute immigrants. It's obvious. We all know it. I'm not saying anything that everyone doesn't already know. This administration is saying it out loud. They're trying to persecute immigrants who are here with permission, without permission, legal, illegal, whatever you want to call it. They have an ideological commitment to reducing the immigrant population of the United States, period. So if it feels scary and brutal out there, it's not an accident. But you compare that with the fact that even during times when the government is taking a kind of benign attitude towards immigration, which, by the way, used to be the case in Democratic and Republican administrations. It's really only in Trump era we see that kind of animus. Immigrants and their American U.S.-born families feel like they're being persecuted or targeted or not welcome because the system is just by its nature can be so bureaucratic and unwelcoming and mystifying. And so I feel like that's something that is both a challenge and an opportunity, which is America takes its attractiveness to immigrants for granted, and we don't make it easy. We don't even make it rational half the time, right? And that has a psychological toll on people, even when they're not being hated on, by our political leaders. So I don't know. I hope that's a helpful insight. And sorry, I guess I would say, and Tamina, I'd love to know what you think about this as well. I feel like sometimes I'm pleading with people who are kind of battling their way through the system. Like, please don't take it personally. Like I know that you got, snarled up in some red tape. I know you got a denial that you didn't think was fair. Like, this is not personal. This is not America saying that you don't make the grade. This is just a large, complicated bureaucratic system kind of turning the crank day by day. Like, it's not personal. There's a lot of things out there that are personal. This is not one of them. But I don't know how compelling that is for someone who's in the middle of it.
Well, speaking of that, yeah, but I think you're the right person to answer this question because you're dealing with clients, you're dealing with these process, you're guiding your clients, and you're dealing with these fears, the misconception. Sometimes this process may feel really unfair. How are you dealing with these questions as part of your job?
Well, it's challenging. I mean, I'll just give you today's example. All morning, I've been in meetings with various people. Most of them were laid off from different companies that are in Washington state. One got an email at 4 a.m. that they were laid off.
Oh, no.
Another, and this is something I will touch on later on. The issue is that immigration law is really complicated. And, one issue can interact with another, but you need to know how they all can subsequently follow each other. There's a pathway that you have to develop with clients, and it really is case by case. So the person who was laid off, their spouse can get a work permit, but that means that they cannot work on an H-4 visa. How can they work? It's complicated because on top of the law being already challenging and archaic, we now have new policies. The law hasn't changed, the regulations haven't changed, but the interpretation is being changed daily through policy memos. Now you have to reinterpret how that affects the client. So this morning, as one person told me, they're leaving tomorrow because they're at the end of their 60 days. Another person is sort of thinking, which visa should I get? Because if I try to get a H-1B, I'm going to be subject to $100,000, which is in the courts at the moment. So there's no easy answer for anybody. And then you throw in the challenges that the service centers have just for accepting cases. They have changed procedures in how they accept filing fees, and more often than not, they're rejecting cases. So when somebody has a hard deadline and you've somehow muddled through and got their cases filed, now you actually don't know if the case is going to be accepted, and we might pass the deadline.
So all the things we tried to make better when we
Yes.
actually, had a mission to deliver for our, the people we served, both Americans and their immigrant family members and immigrant employees. It's just kind of
Yeah.
turned on its head right now. It's very demoralizing.
It very much is. I mean, several emails later this morning, a client's like, can we make sure that this case gets delivered on Saturday because the deadline is Monday? And we're like, we're going to file it. It's not going to be accepted on Saturday because it only gets accepted Monday. But on top of that, FedEx fails us quite often these days.
Oh, man.
You do an overnight shipping and they take 3 days. So the layers of challenges are actually quite invisible to the person who is not seeing it from the outside. So the stress levels are astronomical. And I have learned that to keep my stress levels down, I have to try to make sure the client understands we have a plan, we're going to execute, we can communicate. But let's try to just work on not spiraling out of control because that's just natural.
And yeah, I mean, God, it's hard to stay positive in a world where things are getting worse, not better. Just in terms of pure operations, right? I mean, the way I think about it sometimes is imagine there was only one bank, or imagine a town that only had one bank, and every small business owner and everyone buying a home and everyone trying to open a savings account, the bank would just treat them like garbage. And be like, yeah, no, I mean, we didn't get your application on time. We don't want your money. We need to take the next 12 months to make sure you're not a terrorist. Sorry, like we'll get back to you, right? Just assuming that everybody that wants to bank with that wants to actually borrow money is doing it for some nefarious reason. Now, do banks need to make sure that the tiny fraction of would-be fraudsters and terrorists don't use their bank? Of course they do. But do they turn away the 99.99% of their other customers? No, of course not, right? But that's kind of how our system is set up. It's even during more benign times, it's in the Department of Homeland Security. It's also at the Department of State, where everyone's just under a microscope at all times, and there's no benefit of the doubt. And again, it's very important. It's the government. It's not a commercial bank. Like, obviously, but I would say the same thing about the Small Business Administration or the Veterans Administration or any other government agency that basically engages in a transaction level service, right? It's like, yes, you have a job, just like every credit card company, just like every bank, to make sure that you're filtering out those who would abuse the system. But that's a tiny fraction of your customer base, and everyone else should have a pleasant experience because the bank wants and needs customers. The country wants and needs more hardworking people of all kinds. And so that's kind of my dream, is that someday we'll get there. We've taken it for granted for such a long time that people want to come here, and it's changing, man. I don't know, Tamina, I'd love to know what you're hearing.
I am. I mean,
It's rough out there.
Yeah, I think those statistics just recently released where the numbers, pretty drastically changed from what it was a couple of years ago. Yeah.
What numbers of what?
The numbers of people getting visas or entering the US. I forget where I saw that yesterday. It might have.
There's the hard constraints that the administration is actually banning people. So, I mean, that's up. I mean, for those who are still like students, right? Like we're waiting for the numbers, right? Like international student enrollments in U.S. universities, we're pretty heavily down last year, and who knows, they might be even down further. And that used to be something we could take for granted, is that we have most of the best universities in the world. Of course, people are going to want to come here, and I just hope the damage isn't irreparable.
Can you explain why immigration policy is so sensitive to political shift and changing administrations as well? It's hard to know what is actually kind of one outcome from political decision that is very recent versus what has been shaped throughout the years. And when we talk about the current context.
I mean, I think I have to be honest. Like I don't think it's possible or honest to answer that question without talking about the years that before Trump and the years after Trump, because obviously immigration is a political issue, and different people of different parties, even people within the same party, have had different ideas and different attitudes forever. But But Trump was, from the moment he announced his candidacy in 2015, was delivering a very different, very cynical, very ugly attitude towards immigrants and the role of immigration in America than anything we've seen in probably a century. Back when we're talking about, the early 20th century with, entire political parties like the Know Nothings that were anti-immigrant. Like that was all they cared about, was being anti-immigrant, right? And you had a big political movement to be more nativist, and it was all very very obviously racially coded. So we kind of forgot that there was that element kind of lurking in the recesses of our politics until Trump comes along and just really ramped it up. So I think my short answer is I don't think both sides are equal. I hear some of my former colleagues in government who are civil servants talk about, oh, we're so tired of the pendulum swinging back and forth. And it's like, yeah, I get it. The pendulum swinging back and forth. Part of that is because Congress hasn't done anything to change our immigration laws in, 25 to 36 years, depending on how you count. But and so the executive branch is left, holding the bag, trying to figure out like, well, what do you do without Congress? But part of it is just we're in a very anti-immigrant ideological moment right now. And, if we come out of it again, then there's going to have to be what I would consider a correction back to what most Americans actually want, which is a system that works, that's humane, that supports our economy instead of actively destroying our economy. So I don't see it as a pendulum swing. I see it as I don't know. I see it as a system that's completely out of whack that needs to be brought back into the zone of normal politics.
And Tahmina, would you say that now, given what we just talked about, that you can realistically help them build long-term lives inside this system that continuously evolve? And maybe this needs to be clarified as well, because there are different visa categories. There are visas that are short-term, you have to go back to your home country. There are other ones that you can renew, so it's more long-term. You're able to actually work for American corporations. And so how are you actually navigating that, knowing that it evolves, and in order to actually help them build something?
I agree with Doug that Congress should have done something a long time ago, but in the absence of that, this particular...
We've come close, but that's
We've come close, but it was 2013. It was such a long time ago, but we were very close. But this administration's pushing boundaries, and we're seeing unprecedented, not just policies, just Doug used the word operations earlier, just the operational procedures of things. They're all affecting how you decide. But I'll give you one example, the word travel. In November 2024, I went to a university to speak to international students. And based on all the things that happened in 2017 to 2020, I said to them, please don't travel. And the school was actually a little upset with me because they said, well, look, all these students, it's a school that everybody know about, they have to travel in the summer. They have lots of summer programs. You can't tell them not to travel. And I said, look, you have invited me here to tell students what they need to know, and travel is something that will be affected. Fast forward the clock to March 2025, international students started to see that their statuses were terminated.
Right.
And that led to a whole bunch of other things where international students are now, when they're changing status, they are getting questions on that status issue, but also on criminal issues and many different things. It's evolved. But that travel problem has really stuck and grown into an even bigger problem, including what happened yesterday from the Supreme Court. The United States Supreme Court said if green card holders have criminal charges or pending criminal charges, they will not be allowed to be admitted as green card holders anymore. They will be admitted as arriving aliens, which allows them to essentially be deported easier. Now, the travel issue has evolved from my sort of like niggling feeling that people shouldn't travel because it's an opportunity to really assess their status, has now become a really big issue for almost every immigrant in the country, not just non-immigrant visa holders, but also green card holders. And this is an administration policy. The law has not changed. I want to emphasize that. The regulations have not changed. They are not even telling us what the policy is necessarily all the time.
That's right.
We're just seeing it through action. So the challenges are insurmountable. And it really means that anybody on a visa needs to think twice about making sure they know the rules of their own visa category. But please don't travel unless you speak with your immigration attorney.
And this is why this is so important. And I say that as an immigrant myself, going through different visa categories before being permanent resident here. It's so important to talk to someone who knows the laws, who knows the policy as well, because you can be tempted to do it on your own because it's possible, but it's so complicated. There are things you may overlook that can really make it so much harder for you to be accepted here. And I would like to ask you this question because when we don't really understand what's going on, we hear USCIS. We don't know if this is actually a place where talents are welcome or it's actually really not the good timing to think about the US right now. Can you explain how these different layers and entities work together?
I'd like to. That's a great question, and for the sake of the United States and the wide majorities that are not anti-immigrant, I want to suggest a slight reframing of Tahmina's point earlier, which is yes, times are bad. The system is complicated. It's not insurmountable. Don't panic. Talk to a great lawyer like Tahmina, and you will be able to navigate it. You will be able to navigate it. It's just scary out there, but it's not insurmountable. Yes, it's an alphabet soup of different agencies. Yes, it can seem overwhelming, but there are lots of ways through. I just, you got to set your expectations low, and it's all going to be more complicated, more expensive, and take longer than it should. But I think most people who are talented and tenacious will get where they need to go. I don't know, Tahmina, do you think that's
I agree.
or not?
No, I agree. I just came back from Boston yesterday where I was speaking at a trade summit with the Ghanaian ambassador present. And I really was like, if your business is strong and it's going to be doing all the things that the American economy will value, America is still the place where you can succeed. You just have to make sure your paperwork is stronger than ever. And it is possible. So I think if you don't have hope, you can't move forward. And so I 100% agree with Doug that, it is not insurmountable. You have to have a thick skin and you have to work much harder than before. But
Much
do
harder
not.
than you should.
That's
Right.
true.
But there we are. Yeah.
There have been so much noise about this specific visa category, the H-1B. So can you both tell me what's going on? What is at stake? And is it still interesting to go for that kind of visa? Are there alternative routes to explore what's going on here?
Oh my goodness. Well, if you don't mind me jumping in, Tahmina, I'm going to say some things at like the 50,000 foot level, and then you can tell us what's really going on. Well, first of all, a little plug, my podcast that I co-host called The Melting Pod. We recently did a whole episode on what the heck's going on with H-1B for beginners. And so I encourage people to check that out. But the TLDR of that episode and in general, the H-1B is that for people coming here for the first time, not to study, but to work in a white collar job, yes, it's really difficult because of this $100,000 fee that I believe is unlawful and that a federal judge recently ruled was unlawful, but now the fee is back on as it goes its way through the course. I mean, it's very uncertain, and that $100,000 fee is a real barrier. However, most people who get an H-1B are not coming here for the first time. The vast majority of the people who are on an H-1B are people who came to the United States to study, undergraduate, master's, PhD level, and the H-1B is kind of a step on their journey to a green card. The $100,000 fee does not apply to people who are already here. There are a lot of other barriers that are bad and getting worse, but they are not insurmountable. But to answer, Solène, your last question, yes, there are lots of other pathways besides the H-1B. None of them, I don't want to overpromise and say there's like this super easy thing that nobody knew about. But most people, I would say, who think that the H-1B is their only pathway are probably eligible for other things that they don't even realize. And that's something we're working on at the Talent Mobility Fund, is to not just expand awareness, but expand the number of organizations that are providing direct services for people who, again, are eligible for a wider set of pathways than they realize.
I'll add to that the reason the H-1B visa is so important is because it is the most important visa category in the entire visa soup, because it's for the professionals who have a degree. When you are trying to prove a visa requirement to be successful, you have to meet all of the elements of that. Now, every visa category will have its own elements, and they're not all easy. Just like Doug mentioned, they're not easy. But to have a degree that will allow you to get a job, while not easy, is still one of the better options. If you are selected in the lottery most of the time, there are organizations that can apply for H-1Bs outside the lottery. But it really means you're a professional. And most people with higher education will typically be a professional, whether it's a lawyer or an architect or an engineer or a doctor. We don't have a pathway like that. The alternatives that people would often think about are the O visa. The O visa requires sustained credibility, and that, with the policy changes with this administration, is being scrutinized even more. Doug, to his credit, had worked so hard when he went into USCIS during the Biden administration to really give broader policies so that people could, in fact, meet O visa categories in their daily lives. You're raising funds, that's going to be a point, so to speak. But this administration's now questioning a lot of those things. So the O visa is often the alternative that people look at, but it's getting harder and harder and harder. The E2 often is something people look at, but then you have to invest money in it, and that's not always easy. There are many different obstacles, which is why we come back to the H-1B visa. Now, the H-1B visa has gone through a lot of changes. I write a column in a legal magazine called Above the Law, and I took a little break, but one of the articles I wrote just before I took a break was the H-1B visa has to go through reform because there was a lot of fraud happening in the lottery, and Doug and his team had really taken a lot of care to address that.
Ironically, fraud that we inherited from Trump 1.0, the supposedly anti-fraud people, and that we had to clean up.
Exactly. And they did do an amazing job cleaning up. But, policy, when you're working with different people, you give a little, take a little, and so the regulations have had some impact on that. The administration is now, again, reinterpreting and recreating regulations. So right this moment, H-1B visas have been very challenging in that the government's looking at wages in a way they never looked at before. USCIS is taking a greater look at, is this wage commensurate to the job? Does the job require a higher wage? And that has brought a lot of challenges in how people file for H-1Bs and how, not just in the lottery, but how we're filing them now. But remember, I talked about student visas earlier where they were, their status was terminated. Again, that lens has become even more of a microscope where the government is looking at the status of each individual in a way that they didn't look at before. So H-1Bs are not just about, does this job require a degree and does this job meet the salary that you're promising? We're also now cross-referencing everything in their social media. Did you say you're a founder when you didn't have permission to work as a founder? It has become ever more complicated. And the deadline to file all of these H-1Bs is June 30th. I have to tell you, normally I'm done by now, but because of all of this cross-referencing, we're still going through like, hey, your resume says you were working at such and such place, but I'm not seeing that you had permission to work at that time.
Right. You're trying to anticipate all the scrutiny that you're going to get.
It's a really challenging time. But would I not file an H-1B? No. The H-1B still is the best one for the employers that are trying to fill talent.
But Selena, I have to tell this story. Sorry if you know this already, but it's just so crazy. Do you know when the H-1B visa as we know it was invented by Congress? Can you guess what year?
Want me to answer that? Or
No, I want Selena to answer it.
I have no idea.
Just take a wild guess how many years ago.
10 years ago. I don't know.
No, 36 years ago, 1990. So the H-1B, the modern, visa for professional workers was created by Congress before the internet, before smartphones, before the World Wide Web. It was designed by Congress before anything to do with the modern economy. And then they haven't changed it since then. I mean, they've tweaked the numbers here and there, but the numbers reflect an economy that was half the size of the current economy and a population that was much smaller. The criteria reflect a world that doesn't exist anymore. And the craziest irony to me is that it is basically a guest worker program for white collar professionals that has all this red tape designed, like, oh, well, is the employer paying you enough? And we have a mechanism to make sure that people are paid a fair amount, and it's called the free market, right? Like when you apply for a green card, the government doesn't have to look at the wage you're going to be paid. They don't, because you're not tied to your employer. You get a green card and you go out in the job market just like a U.S. citizen, and you work for whoever you want. And if they offer you a wage that you don't take, you walk on and find someone else. Like you can't, it's very difficult to exploit somebody who has full labor mobility, right? And so the answer to this problem is very simple. There's very few things in life where the simpler answer is the better answer. I mean, usually like complicated problems require complicated solutions, but for this, it's actually very straightforward. We have the answer. It's called a green card. It's called permanent residency. It's called you're a talented person who's well educated. Just go work for whoever the hell you want to work for. Yeah. And they'll, and if you don't like it, you walk. But instead we force people through this like ridiculous, kind of antiquated bureaucratic scrutiny where the government, I sound like a raving libertarian. I'm a pretty like, I'm a Democrat. Like I'm not usually a raving libertarian, but in this case I am. It's like, we have markets, we have labor markets, they work. Why are we distorting them with these ridiculous temporary visa categories where your last year employer has every incentive to exploit you? It's ridiculous and we should fix it. And the answer is more green cards. And the wonderful thing about green cards, Tahmina, tell me if you agree or disagree, is that it's something where unions are pretty pro green card and pretty anti guest worker visa. And, maybe in private, companies kind of like exploiting people, but you're not going to catch them saying that in public. They'll be like, hey, we like green cards too. Right. So I think if we ever have a chance to legislate again, which I'm not very bullish on, that's the answer. But go ahead, Tahmina.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the green card, the process is so complicated.
For green cards?
It is actually.
Yeah, no, it's not great, but at least at the end of the rainbow, you have freedom. Economic freedom.
Yes. It depends on how you're getting the green card. So just this morning, I was speaking with somebody who wants to help somebody whose TPS is coming to an end, for example. But this person didn't maintain status. So even though the employer wants to sponsor them, you can go through the motion of showing that you couldn't find an American worker. You've gone through the motion of getting the prevailing wage from the Department of Labor. But ultimately, this person will not get a green card because they did not maintain status. And so the process, the other thing I will say is, and the adjustment of status memo for listeners who sort of this feels left field, a few weeks ago, there was a memo that came out from the...
You're using technical language. I actually, this was a huge story that even non-specialists paid attention to, but they called it, you have to call it the green card memo, not the adjustment.
The green card memo. Yeah, absolutely. You're totally right. So the green card memo came out. Basically, the government, the administration's policy is that it's going to be discretionary. We're not going to give green cards from the United States anymore. You have to leave the country and come back. And then they walked back saying, no. Most people who are here will get their green cards. But they really said that so that the media would back away. Because the policy remains in writing. It is there. It's being followed by immigration officers.
Well, unclear. It's based on what I'm hearing. They are really? You're seeing this day to day?
Yeah. I mean, I'm in so many groups and forums, etc. So the word discretion is being used. I think ultimately what the green card memo did. Yes, I think the green card memo essentially gave permission to use discretion broadly. And my understanding is that now officers, they used to have to give a little note about why they denied somebody's green card. Now they have to write a little note if they approved it. That's the inside info somebody shared with me at an immigration conference recently. But the ultimate point is that the green card is very difficult to get no matter which path you take. But it isn't necessarily as secure as it used to be.
That is certainly true for the time being.
For the time being. for the timings.
Yeah, it used to be that a lot of people of course, there's millions of people who are permanent residents in the United States, 9 million of whom are eligible to become citizens and have not done so yet. And something's very different now. I think in the past, when you polled people, what's the most appealing part of becoming a U.S. citizen for immigrants who are eligible? People would say, oh, I really want to be able to vote in elections. I want to sponsor my relatives. I want to be able to travel more freely with a U.S. passport. All the things you would think of that make life, just a little bit more well integrated. And, it's like the cherry on top, right? Because with the green card, like we said, the main thing you get, the main prize is the green card, because that's what unlocks your economic freedom and makes you, breathe a sigh of relief that you're not going to have to, file a bunch of paperwork all the time. But anyway, that's all changed. Now, I think a lot of people, their number one interest in becoming a U.S. citizen is because they're afraid and because they feel like being a permanent resident isn't as safe as it was before. You hear all these stories of ICE, arresting students who are permanent residents because of their political beliefs, or detaining someone at the border after going to home for a wedding and asking them, holding them for 4 days and asking them crazy questions about some minor infraction that was expunged. And so just all this really just merciless and unnecessary, again, I would call it persecution of people who are, even who are permanent residents and who have no reason to be scrutinized in this way, I think may have the ironic consequence that more people pursue citizenship, even though, again, the administration knows this and they're trying to make it harder. They just announced this week that they want to dramatically increase the cost of applying for citizenship, although that won't go into effect for several months. So there's this interesting window right now where I think millions of permanent residents are asking themselves, wait, is now the time to go for it because it's only getting harder and because I need the protection? Or am I too afraid of government right now to stick my neck out? And the answer is, it really depends on the person. And we go back to what Tahmina said, which is, please call a lawyer and find out what the answer is for you. Because the answer might be, actually, no, now's not the good time. Or the answer might be absolutely like full speed ahead. Now is a great time to pursue citizenship. It's only going to get harder. You're only going to be further back in line if you don't. But you really do need to talk to a human expert and not delay doing that.
I like that he said human expert. Don't go to ChatGPT.
Yes, do not rely on ChatGPT alone. It's a nice like rough draft, but you need to talk to a lawyer.
What is also interesting is that I think one of the misconceptions when talking to people around me is that talking about immigration in the US is not always, it's not clear, because you may talk about illegal immigration, legal immigration, and different status involved. Then there is the permanent residency, as we said, the green card. There are also citizenship, and all these different parts are moving and also impacted by policy or political decision as well. And it's important to be able to dissociate what's going on for one and the other, because it's really easy at the end of the day to say or think there is a problem with immigrants and putting everybody in the same category. And like, not everybody is going through the same, challenges, and they
That's
have
right.
to have specific guidance. Something that I've learned also, it's so tied to diplomacy as well. I mean, for some visa categories, whether you're coming from India or you're coming from Germany or from the Philippines, it's a very different waiting time. It's different pathways.
Yes, we got to fix that.
It's important to also know that this is another layer in here.
Can I tell you something insane I learned about recently that we got to fix as government people when we have the chance? So, I've only in my policy career, I've worked most closely with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, which is like a big part of the immigration system. But as you said, it's not the only part. And I'm not an expert in the State Department. My wife is, but I'm not. And I just learned recently that Mexico. Mexico's kind of an important country in terms of immigration flows to the United States. It's like the biggest country in terms of immigration flows to the United States. And if you live in Mexico, which is a very large country geographically, and you are seeking a green card, you're seeking permanent residency, you can't go to any consulate. You have to go to like one or two consulates that have been designated like the green card consulates, which could be 1,000 miles away. It's crazy. When I learned this, I was like, there's one more thing that we are just completely giving people the stiff arm for no reason. Like, it's crazy that in Mexico, every consulate doesn't do green card processing. Like, why would you make someone travel all that way? They're a huge economic partner and ally. I don't know. I could go on, but
It's
the
true
more
for
you look, the
Canada
crazier
too.
it gets. What?
It's true for Canada too. Immigrant visas are
Really?
processed only in Montreal.
Only in Montreal? That's crazy. So if you're living on the Pacific Coast and a U.S. citizen, you're married to a U.S. citizen, you have to go all the way to Montreal to get your. It's crazy. All right, one more thing we got to fix in the future.
Are you making a list?
I have a list. I have a list. I had a list last time. We got through a lot of it, but the list is getting bigger every day.
Yeah, this episode is about giving you some homework. I'm afraid.
Thank you.
I just wanted to go back to the previous discussion we had about, talent, global talent. And so Tahmina, you just mentioned, a few things about, some clients are relying on work visa, losing their job, and how tricky it gets. I guess something that is really important to know is that there are indeed visa categories that are for interns, for students, but most visa are tied to employment. What were policymakers originally trying to solve when creating, for example, protections or grace periods? Is it something that was designed for potential laid-off workers, or was there another purpose?
I'm going to throw this back to Doug in just a moment, but in 2008 and 9, when I mentioned I opened my law firm, and there were people laid off left and right. And what I heard over and over again is, I please just want to have my startup, let me have a visa. And there was a misconception at the time that they would have a grace period. Now, the grace period for H-1B, you would only get 10 days. If you have completed your term, and if you're laid off in the middle of it, or if you quit, you have no grace period. That was a big misconception in 2008 and 9. Somehow we managed to, muddle through it. A lot of people survived, some people didn't. But this is where, Doug comes in 2017, I believe, a new regulation came in where
very, very, very last second before Trump was inaugurated the first time.
Yeah, exactly. And that regulation, thanks to Doug and his team, created the 60-day grace period. And that became the lifeline for all the things we saw since. And in 2017, we could not have anticipated the layoffs that we saw in the magnitude that we saw in 2022 and 3 and today. But that 60-day grace period has become the thing that keeps people from being able to sort of like remain in status and just an avatar of somebody who was laid off. They might have been working at a big Fortune 100 company for like 10 years. They might have bought a house. They might have had 2 kids going to school. They have a car. They have a spouse who's now working because they're in a line to get a green card. Suddenly they're laid off. They don't have a visa. That green card option is now off the table. I told you earlier that it takes 2, 3, 4 years to get to that point where you're just waiting. Their entire lives just got up in the air.
Yeah. Think about how awful it is to get laid off for anybody and how disruptive it is and how terrifying. And now add to that, there's this extra clock ticking and you might have to tear up all your roots in the country you've adopted and go home. Bring your U.S. citizen child back to a country they have no connection to. Sell all your property to loss. It's crazy what we do to people.
Mm-hmm. And so that policy becomes very important to keep your legal status here. And I just want to maybe jump forward just a little bit, because this is important to explain that policy definitely needs to sort of adjust to what's happening on the ground. Sometimes policy is policy. It's not necessarily flowing through to the people who are operating or should be operating. So, let's talk about 2022 and 2023. When Doug was at the White House, one of the things that was happening is that people were having these mass layoffs. We now thankfully have a 60-day grace period, but we have this gap in understanding and in procedure in how people would leap forward to an H-1B later on. Kudos to Doug and his team. He sat down and he listened. And he said, well, this is supposed to happen already. Why isn't it happening? I said, well, it doesn't happen. And, there were many conversations where Doug listened intently, understood, and he went back and he created this very, very profoundly important, frequently asked questions on what happens.
How many times have you heard that for a profoundly important FAQ?
It really, really is. It really is. And that is how people came to rely on the 60-day grace period to then file for an interim visa of some sort, whether it's B1, B2, or F or something, that they would then get a job later on to be able to continue with their profession, their career, their life goals. But what this administration did was they came in and they archived that page. They did not say what they archived. They said some of these policies are archived.
I still think people should rely on that page unless told otherwise. But
what's happening? We do rely on it, but they're denying cases because the problem that you solved, what you solved was saying, well, okay, the B1, B2 will be picked up.
These are tourist visas, basically.
Yes, exactly. They will pick them up when they're looking at the subsequent visa, whether it's an O or an H or an E or whatever. But this administration's basically saying, no, that is pending. Therefore, you do not have status to get another H-1B. We'll approve the H-1B and merit, but not your status. Voila, you're now subject to $100,000. So they're outright denying them, to be honest.
And they're doing that with no transparency. I mean,
no transparency.
The crazy backstory here is, when these layoffs started happening, and I was at USCIS, there were thousands of news stories about, for regular U.S. citizens, were like, can you believe that people only have 60 days? Because everyone forgot that it used to be 0 days, which is, 60 days isn't great either, right? And so it was kind of this national mini scandal. And so I went to the experts within the agency and said, can we do anything about this? Like 60 days isn't enough time for a normal person. And they said, oh, it shouldn't be a problem. You can stop the clock by applying for a new H-1B or applying for a visitor visa. Like, yeah, people should be fine. Don't worry about it. I'm like, well, nobody thinks they're fine. Like, everyone thinks they have 60 days. Like, read the news. And the experts were like, oh, well, there's all these ways you can stop the clock. I was like, well, where can people go to learn that? They're like, I guess nowhere, but it's true. I'm like, well, if we haven't said it out loud, how's anyone supposed to know it's true? So that was the birth of this, in Tahmina's immortal words, profoundly impactful FAQ. It's rare in policymaking that you get to improve people's lives at a reasonable scale, but just by publishing an FAQ. But it really was it was this secret accepted policy within the agency that we'd never said out loud before. And just by speaking it out loud, you suddenly give people a lot of relief. And now, unfortunately, and this is not the first or the last time this will happen, this new administration is kind of changing longstanding practices and policies without telling anybody, without, just surprise, we decided to change things without any, and that's not the way a government should be run, to put it lightly.
But I want to make sure that I give a public thank you to Doug because he really sat down and he listened. We had a Zoom call like this and I'm like, well, this is the problem. And he goes, well, that shouldn't be a problem. I'm like, well, it is. And, and that's when he said out loud the things that I personally didn't think was possible. And so it made all the difference. Hundreds of thousands of lives were protected because of that FAQ. Children were able to go to school because of that FAQ.
Wow.
It really honestly made a big difference in what people could do, which is what people cannot do now. I mean, I have clients who've left the country because of this situation. People are really in a bind because that policy has been archived.
Right. I mean, again, Solon, the original sin goes back to Congress because there shouldn't be 1 million people on H-1Bs in America. Like, most of these people should have green cards already. And it's because Congress put these artificial caps not only on H-1Bs, but on green cards. And not only on green cards, but on green cards by country. Again, Congress didn't intend to create, a 100-year backlog for people from India. They didn't have any special, animus towards people from India. They just, in the course of horse trading over this legislation, are like, well, we probably shouldn't have every green card going to the big countries. So let's put a cap on, no country should get more than, 8%. No, it's 6%. Let's settle on 7. So you have this arbitrary 7% cap that has the unintended consequence of, 1 million people, mostly from India, that are probably never going to get a green card because the lines just keep getting longer and longer and longer, and not because USCIS is slow, because Congress created a bottleneck. So the best solution would be like, these people should all have green cards and be citizens already, most of them. But in the absence of that, yeah, it's important to listen. And Tahmina, I just want to add to that, it's very gratifying and humbling to hear you say that. I want to say that was the culture that my boss, Or Jadu, created. I think she was an incredibly effective director of USCIS, and she was actively listening all the time. I mean, just through Twitter, she would follow, she would see the people tagging her as the director of this giant agency saying like, oh my God, this thing's ruining my life. Like, why isn't USCIS doing this? And then she would tell her team, like, what is going on with this? And, I hate to say it, but very often we would find out about things going sideways directly from social media, more often than from our own people, because our own people were overwhelmed just trying to get the basic work done. I'm not faulting them, right? They were insulated from it. The way our government works, again, speaking of unintended consequences, is if you're a civil servant, you're afraid to engage the public half the time. Like you're just an operator, you're in your little bubble, you're trying to get, Tahmina said, like, you're at the Vermont Service Center doing like a particular whatever. Like, there are laws that actually tie your hands from engaging the public if you're a civil servant. So even if they wanted to do more public engagement, they're actually restricted. And so very often, our tiny little political team of like a dozen people, we'd have to say, oh, Twitter seems really angry about XYZ. And they'd be like, oh, well, can you tell us more? We'd be like, yeah, why don't we just talk to some people? They'd be like, oh, we can't talk to some people. Look at this statute and that statute and this statute. It's unfair. It's like, oh, God. All right. Well, I'm a political appointee. Those laws don't apply to me. So I'm just going to call some people and I'll let you know what's really going on. And then we could come up with these wonderful solutions together, because the civil servants are very dedicated and they know what they're doing and they want to help. But Congress, again, inadvertently has created this barrier between the people who, have spent their careers serving the public and the public. And okay, it's another thing I'll put on my checklist. So we gotta fix that too.
I just sort of feel like I need to say this because I have two kids, and for many years I've had these jokes, and the joke was, why is 6 afraid of 7? Because 7, 8, 9. So when you were just doing the 7%, I just couldn't stop.
Yes.
Anyway.
But that's so interesting. It's really hard to really understand from outside, and obviously both of you are so deeply involved in this mission of providing the right information, guiding people, helping move forward and for the better. But speaking of social media, and when Doug, you mentioned H-1B visa created 36 years ago. Obviously, everything was different. People were not relying on social media and the internet and so on and so forth. Now, the information is spreading at like instantaneously. And are you also trying to be as reactive as possible in these different areas? Because there is so much noise, and I guess sometimes it's just wrong information and you have to fight it. How has this social media been taking place as part of your job? Like when you compare to 20 years ago, what you were doing and dealing with every day?
Well, gosh, there's so many ways to address that question, and none of them are very pleasant. I will say that by and large, the federal government hasn't really caught up with the way people actually absorb information.
One of the things that put me on the map was my blog. From 2008, when I started my firm, I was just writing. I was just writing blindly. I didn't know who was reading, but I just felt compelled to just share what I was seeing. And it really started with a local newspaper that came and said, will you write for us? And I said, I'm not a writer. And I said, no, write about how you get citizenship. And the editor kept giving me topics. So blogging was the way that I would actually get information out. And this is when Facebook was coming up, I guess. It was still being, just taking shape. LinkedIn was there, but not used in the same way as it is today. But these days I don't blog as much as I do the social media information, because that's where people are getting their information. Don't travel today. Get your citizenship now. Student visas are going to change tomorrow. I think social media has become the way people consume news. And it really is, which social media platform are they on? Necessarily read a lot of Reddit, but today, just alone, 3 clients have said, well, on Reddit, there was this forum.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, okay, well, I'm behind on Reddit then.
Yeah, that's wild. I mean, I've never really been a big Reddit reader either, which I think probably needs to change if I want to have my finger on the pulse more of what people are talking about. I mean, I don't know if I've ever told you this story, but here we go. Again, back when I was at USCIS, we have a bunch of well-meaning people in the communications department, mostly civil servants. And, their job hasn't changed in decades. It's like, all right, the agency is about to announce a new policy or, we want to get the word out. So we draft a press release and we get a quote from the director and we, have a list of journalists that we send the press release to. We post the press release on our website and then we all, pat ourselves on the back for a job well done. It's like, okay, how many people are going to read this press release? Almost nobody. Even if a lot of journalists pick it up and write articles about it, is that going to get to most of our target audience, mainly the people who are paying us money to do an adjudication for them? Probably not. Have we thought about where people are actually getting their news? Because it's 8 press releases and it ain't the legacy media. No, we have not thought about that. We do have a USCIS Twitter feed. Great. We put stuff out there and, that's fine. But at one point I was so, for like the 800th time, I was talking to, someone in the immigration ecosystem, whether it was an attorney or an influencer or someone. I was like, oh, did you know X? And they'd be like, no, I have no idea what you're talking about. Like, oh, this is a big deal. Nobody knows about it. And so I asked our well-meaning comms team, communications team at the agency, I'm like, hey, next time we put out a press release, can we also, in addition to sending it to journalists, can we send it to like social media influencers? And they were like, did you say influencer? That sounds like political influence. That sounds like unethical. What are you talking about? I was like, no, don't you know what an influencer is? This has nothing to do with ethics. This is just like, there's people on YouTube with millions of followers who are going to reach way more people than the Washington Post. And they just didn't want to hear it. And so I just put together my own list. Tahmina was on it, a bunch of other people with like prominent blogs or social media accounts. And like, there's nothing unethical about it. I was just like, hey, did you see this press release? This is what it means in plain English. And people would, share that information. And we reached so many more people that way. So, that's a maybe too long answer to your very simple question. And by the way, I was probably doing a incredibly bad job at it. Like, as my 15-year-old daughter would tell you if she were here. Like, I mean, yeah, I might have been like 5 times more sophisticated just by doing simple things than the like true legacy team. But like, we should have hired a 25-year-old to just like blow it out of the water.
And so it's so funny that there are some misconception as well when within, USCIS and how to handle things and how to interpret things and how to interpret expectations from the public and so on. What is one of the main paradoxes that is part of this job?
Paradoxes all the way down.
Yeah.
Tahmina, I want to hear your answer first.
You can live in love and fear all at once. I mean, the client that is trying to stay in the United States. Today, we had great news about a client who got a green card, and this person filed a green card through their spouse who was a green card holder. Now, the categories of who files for you makes a difference in how long it takes. And we went through a very long journey. You're doing this for the love of this person in your life so that you can be under the same roof, on the same soil. But the fear of what this policy will do and what this change will do sort of really engulfs you. And so I think living in love and fear all at once is probably the biggest thing I'd say. And that goes for jobs, being laid off, the employer hiring an employee. One of the conversations today was an employer saying, I can't live without this particular employee, but I had to say, I'm so sorry, there's no visa category that would work for them. So I think love and fear is probably the best thing I can tell you.
Yeah. And I think reflecting on that love and fear, it's not only true for immigrants battling their way through the system. I think there's also a paradox like that among native-born Americans. in that even some of the most ardent opponents of immigration, I'm talking about like regular people who, think they're voting for, tough on the border and, policies or whatever. Like they love the people in their communities who come from elsewhere. Like it's, I think even if all we looked at was people who answered polls as, being quote unquote very anti-immigrant, the 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 person they're envisioning is not a real person, right? They're imagining the person they've been told to be afraid of, who's far away at a border, coming without permission, invading. Quote, I mean, their words, not mine. And it's this unseen threat that's getting ever closer. But in the community itself, it's like, oh, we love this restaurant owner. We love this construction worker. We love this care work giver. We love this small business owner. Oh my God, they're being deported. No, please no. I mean, people in the reddest parts of America are appalled when they see their neighbors being deported for no good reason. And I think that's a very core paradox, but it gives me like a glimmer of some hope. I mean, I actually don't think that a lot of the people who voted for some of the uglier rhetoric really knew what they were doing. Some people certainly did. I mean, let's face it, there are millions of people in this country who are just, virulently anti-immigrant for no rational or defensible reason. But I think there's plenty of people on the Republican side of the aisle who are, in fact, very pro-immigrant when it comes to people in their own communities and are not, racially motivated in any anti-immigrant sentiment. And so I think that, I guess that's the only thing that keeps me from being roiled in despair is that, yeah, we had an election and yes, the anti-immigrant side won, but I don't think there's actually an anti-immigrant majority in the electorate. I think it was like, elections are complicated. People vote for a lot of different things. And you can see it, right? Like the things this administration is doing to immigrants are very unpopular in terms of like, there's no majority for any of this, even though a majority voted for Trump. So we'll see what happens.
I'll just add to that I think people forget that the fabric of America is woven by immigrants. People take pride in Americana, the Nordstrom, the skyscrapers of New York. I mean, all of these were really facilitated by immigrants, and just down to what's happening in the country right now with this festive World Cup. The players of the World Cup team made of a lot of immigrants. So, it is part and parcel of our lives here. And it's easy to just ignore it and just go into a tantrum of what immigrants may or may not be in their minds. But it's a factual thing. It's very much a fabric of our society.
And I think the argument is a lot easier to make and becomes more self-evident when you just do a find replace the word immigrant with the word person. I mean, it's almost funny. Yeah, I don't think there's any governor in America or mayor in America of any political persuasion who wants fewer people in their jurisdiction, right? I don't think there's anybody who wants America to be shedding people. I don't think there's anyone in America who wants our economy to have fewer people, right? I don't think there's anyone, if a bunch of people, I mean, you see this all the time, right? A lot of people are leaving California and moving to Texas. So that's like internal migration, right? It's not international migration. So US citizens leaving California and moving to Texas. The Texans are stoked. They love making fun of California and talking about how, we're getting all these extra people. You suck, right? An immigrant's just a person who happens to be from a different country. And so, the haters have realized that the word immigrant just is kind of a synonym to other, scary, invader, right? It's just a person. And when you think of it that way, hopefully it's easier to kind of take a deep breath and realize this isn't that scary. This isn't that complicated. And by the way, the only way our country is going to grow is through immigration, starting now. Here, can I do another pop quiz, Solon? Is that okay?
Of course, yeah.
Okay.
Go for it.
What year did the Social Security Administration just announce that their trust fund is going to run out of money and they're going to have to start cutting benefits for Americans?
I don't know. I'm going to fail every test.
No, just guess. Just guess.
I'm going to guess 2040.
2033.
What?
Yeah. really soon, right?
Oh my God.
For all of our adult lives, the year was like over a decade away. It was always over a decade away. It was like, oh yeah, no, it's really soon. Okay, next question. What is the year that the Congressional Budget Office just announced U.S. deaths are going to be higher than U.S. births for the first time, basically ever?
2030.
2030. You got it. Exactly. What
Wow.
year?
Yes.
What year are working age? What year are we going to start having more working age people, or more working age Americans leaving the workforce than entering the workforce? Trick question. It already happened. We're already living in that world.
Wow.
Our native-born working population is shrinking. Our total native-born population is about to start shrinking. Our Social Security Trust Fund is going to therefore start running out of money because we have more old people than working age people. And guess what? There's only one solution to all this. It doesn't cost anything. Just more people from elsewhere who actively want to come here and contribute of all kinds. I'm not just like, oh, high skill all the time. We need people from all different education levels, all different specialties, all different countries. That's a huge advantage we have over other countries that are going to be every rich country is going to be struggling with this. And we have a chance to kind of, not forever, but at least delay the demographic reckoning. And we're just doing the exact opposite right now. So it's just insanity.
But what is very interesting too is that despite everything that is happening, this country is still so attractive.
Yes,
that
yes.
attractiveness persists to the extent that some people will wait years and years and put their lives on hold to be able to come here and to be part of this big market, which means a lot of opportunities. We talk a lot about how immigrants are perceived and how some disconnect may happen. You think about a person, an individual in your community, suddenly they represent something else. They are actively contributing to something in your life. You read headlines and may think, oh, this is actually a threat and this is abstract. This is other norms. This is other behavior. This is another culture. This is threatening because the unknown is bad. What can immigrants sometimes see about America that Americans themselves may not notice?
The Constitution and democracy is so incredibly important in this country because that is the beacon of hope that we have and we shine a light on throughout the world. So when people come here, even if they come from, Europe where people generally have a lot of rights, there are people who are coming from different countries where they don't have the same kind of rights. And so they come here with the belief that they will have their freedom to live the way they want to, freedom of speech and all the things that we typically take for granted and we're starting to see constricted. I will say that some clients have told me, well, I'm starting to see how it used to be in my country, So, it is interesting. But for the moment, people still come here because they see the freedoms. And the American dream is still true. And let's face it, America is a beautiful country. I mean, I recently became a bird photographer. And I am starting to see the country through new eyes and a new lens, literally a lens. It is so beautiful. You can be in snow and mountains and rivers and heat and all the different types of geography and nature. So, and the economy, as you said, the market, if you make it in the US, you are likely making it around the world. Think about Zoom, think about Instagram, think about WhatsApp. You make it here, you are making it elsewhere. So America represents opportunity, freedom, and that has not gone away yet. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to do our best to use our voices to make sure we hold on to democracy, hold on to the freedoms that America actually portrays and brings to us. And in fact, I have to say, when I became a U.S. citizen, I wrote about it, and the Seattle Times published my article. I was I was moved. To me, it was another case at the office. And my husband is like, oh, come to the ceremony. I'm like, nah, you don't have to come. I'm just checking a box off. And then he came. I was so grateful he came because I cried. Yeah, I cried throughout the ceremony. I was suddenly like, oh my God, there's this video of God Save America, or I forget, with all these images of the forefathers, in war and up to present day. And I'm like, it was like a rebirth. And I think what happens to immigrants when they become U.S. citizens, they really, truly love America.
Oh, yeah.
And that's the thing that is not always understood.
But I think at a gut level, most Americans understand that. Let me tell you a story. One of the favorite things I got to do while I was at USCIS, and it almost happened by accident, is one of the best things about USCIS is like this is the agency that runs the citizenship ceremonies by and large. Like some of them are overseen by judges, but USCIS is the stage managers of all these citizenship ceremonies. They're happening every day all over America, and all Americans love citizenship ceremonies. I mean, I don't know what the polling data is, but it's probably 99%. Like everyone loves it. Donald Trump has hosted citizenship ceremonies on a fairly frequent basis because they're so popular. I got to go back to my hometown, Jacksonville, Florida, surprise my dad, who's a season tickets holder for the Jacksonville Jaguars, because they were doing a halftime citizenship ceremony for 70 people at the 50-yard line after the national anthem. And I got to go lead the Pledge of Allegiance after, as part of and it was amazing. So there's like tens of thousands of people, football fans in Jacksonville, Florida, just cheering their guts out for these 70 people from all over the world, waving their little flags and taking the oath of allegiance. It's beautiful. And I don't think we've lost that. And I will read you a quote from someone who is not my favorite president, but who has captured this beautifully in a way that I used to be bipartisan. This is a direct quote from Ronald Reagan, his last speech before leaving office in 1989, January 1989. He said, and I won't do my Reagan impression, "Since this is the last speech that I will give as president, I think it's fitting to leave one final thought, an observation about a country which I love. It was stated best in a letter I received not long ago. A man wrote me and said, 'You can go to live in France, but you cannot become a Frenchman. You can go to live in Germany or Turkey or Japan, but you cannot become a German, a Turk, or a Japanese. But anyone from any corner of the earth can come to live in America and become an American.'"
So true.
It's a beautiful quote. And by the way, it's also important to emphasize this too. As a French citizen, I can tell that I know so many stories about how hard this is to immigrate in France. So there is obviously so much going on in the US, but immigration policy is part of any country's policy and debates, and
Yeah.
so it's really interesting to see that it's ever evolving. It's really confronting deep questions about the culture of a country, its future, its history, and also the different perspective. So it's really hard to have everybody agree on something that is so important. And I'd like to also continue on what you said, Tahmina, just before. How does immigration actually reshape culture? Creativity you mentioned, but there is also medicine, science, and society more broadly.
My gosh, how does immigration reshape everything? When the American settlers, the settlers came from the UK, I wrote this book called The Startup Visa Policy Book, and I actually did a lot of history research. And at the time, when the settlers came to America, I forget the name, but bought some seeds of tobacco seeds. And the tobacco seeds essentially allowed, trade to happen between places. And that trade is what shaped that community. And that was the beginning. So in my little sort of understanding of things, trade does allow things to exchange back and forth, and it grows. And today we're in America, which is doing trade with all parts of the world. Immigration, culture, food, innovation, all of these things shape who we are. And America's looked upon as this superpower that is helping other countries. If you think about what's happening in Africa with Ebola, they were like, without the USAID funds, they couldn't track all of the diseases that were happening. Everything is interconnected. There's no, sort of what Doug said at the top of the hour, everything is interconnected. You can't can't talk about employment without talking about immigration. You can't talk about medicine without talking about immigration. Immigration is intertwined, whether people can see it or not.
And this is also something remarkable about this country. And there is a reason why it's so fascinating. The level of diversity that constitutes the population of this country is quite unique as well. So how to live all together? What is a desirable future when we speak about immigration and immigration policy? And would you say, Doug, that policy can realistically account for all these, aspects: identity, belonging, uncertainty, family, emotional complexity, economics? How is it possible to integrate all these when talking about policy?
Well, I will tell you why I'm still really grateful to be in this field and have some excitement for the future, which is I'd like to believe that the current phase will pass. I mean, we've been in a similar phase, an anti-immigrant phase, not too long ago. We came out of it, then we got thrust back into it even worse. Hopefully, we'll come out of it even stronger. No matter what, again, I don't mean to be a downer, but assuming we keep our republic and maintain our democracy, at some point we'll have a different administration. And no matter what happens, there will be some opportunities to improve, and I think improve pretty dramatically. If by some miracle we have a Congress that's willing to take action, there's all kinds of good ideas out there. I mean, like Tahmina said, we almost passed a comprehensive immigration bill through both houses of Congress and had Obama sign it back in 2013. And you could copy paste that bill today, and most of it would still be very beneficial. So it's not like we don't have ideas. So if Congress had the ability to do stuff, it would be remarkable how much we could do for the American people and for newcomers. But even if that doesn't happen, which again, I think it's low probability that Congress will be in a position to do that, there's a lot the executive branch can do that we left on the shelf, both in the Obama administration and in the George W. Bush administration, and in, needless to say, the Trump administration, Biden administration. So there's a lot of really beneficial policies we can change. Even just the kind of grinding work of making the machine work better for everybody, just the operations, making it more welcoming and less opaque and less and less crazy making. There's just we have a lot of unfinished business, and so I'm very hopeful that we can give people more of what they deserve in terms of a system that acknowledges people's humanity, acknowledges that they are just people who want to contribute to the United States, people in families with U.S. citizens most of the time, and that we should act like it, and we can, and I'm reasonably hopeful that we'll have the political will to do that.
And you, Tahmina, given what Doug just said, what would be the most desirable change that would have positive impact, according to you?
One of the questions I often get is, if you had to change one law or one thing, what would you change? Somebody who's been a proponent of international talent and startup visas, it might look like that's the one thing I would ask for. But what I really ask for is changing the law from 1996 that instituted the 3 and 10-year bar. Because removing and repealing that 3 and 10-year bar would actually have the highest good possible. When you hear the rhetoric of go back to your home country and get in line and come back, there's no line and there's no way to come back. But if you can remove the 3 and 10-year bar, people would have an opportunity to come back. And I think this green card memo that just came out is a catalyst for both sides to come together and say, okay, we'll give you one thing. What is it? If you can remove the 3 and 10-year bar, the green card memo that they actually want to implement could actually have some sort of effect. There's no way for people to come back. So as things stand, the green card memo says, go out of the country and basically don't come back. And because there are many different obstacles, and if people want to read more about it, my Above the Law article on the green card memo has 10 steps of 10 top issues and they might have some more insight. That's what I would like to see. Ultimately, we do need comprehensive immigration reform. As Doug mentioned, we may or may not get that. But if we can have something, repealing the 3 and 10-year bar will actually have a really huge impact.
And for those of your listeners who may not know what that is, it was in 1996, Clinton was running for re-election as a Democratic presidential candidate, or Democratic president. And so he made a compromise with congressional Republicans to look tough on immigration. And so a lot of the dysfunction of our system stems from that. And one of the things that this law did was said, well, if you're here and you're undocumented for more than a year, I believe, Tamina, is that right? Or more than 6 months? I don't know. Like basically, if you're
6 to 12 months without status is a 3-year ban, and
right.
12 months or more is a 10-year ban.
Basically, if you leave, if you're here without permission for that period of time, and then you leave the country, you are not allowed to come back, basically for 10 years for most people. And so, of course, this had the unintended and ironic consequence that it jacked up our undocumented population because a lot of people want to go home. They don't want to stay here their whole lives, but now they can't because they'll never be able to come back. And so it's kind of the natural, cycle of people like coming to work and going home and coming back to visit, like just broken. People can't go home to see dying relatives. People can't go home for family milestones. We're talking about like American families, like people who married a U.S. citizen but aren't documented. It's insane. And I really appreciate, Tamina, that that's what you put first of all, because it's affecting so many millions of people into this quiet, despairing way that doesn't make a lot of the headlines, but it's kind of just this deep injustice and foolishness at the heart of our laws.
I think the green card memo actually puts a spotlight on this issue, but I don't think I've seen anybody talk about it.
Well, that's part of what it's for, right? It's trying to force people to have this paradoxical non-choice, which is like, oh, you thought you could apply for a green card? No, actually you can't, because we're going to make you leave the country first. And now that you left the country, you can't come back.
Exactly.
For a lot of people, not everybody, but.
And so for the audience, obviously talking to a lawyer like you, Tahmina,
And not like me.
So to get the right information, where can they have access to the most accurate one?
You follow my LinkedIn, listen to my podcast, follow Tahmina on social media, follow people who are, either really trusted practitioners or are trying to, explain the news in good faith, and obviously most of the news, most of the real newspapers try to get it right, although it's hard because it's complicated.
I will say that the instructions on the various forms are informative for people.
They haven't figured out how to spoil that yet.
Yeah, I mean, it's complicated to understand, but at least those are the forms we fill out. So read the instructions. The other place that I would say, I mean, everything that Doug said, and the American Immigration Lawyers Association is an 18,000 membership association, and they have a public-facing page. So if people are looking for updated information, they can go there. There's a directory of lawyers. They can put in, searches for specific areas, and they'll find lawyers for specific geographical areas as well as subject matter expertise. So those are some of the places I would say that LinkedIn is a great place to follow both me and Doug. I have 2 podcasts. One is called Tahmina Talks Immigration. The other is the Startup Visa. And I have written so many books. I have so many books in my head that I don't have time to write, but there are other books that people will find useful. One is called the Startup Visa Guide for Startups and Founders. And it's an easy to read way to understand the various visa categories so that people can use them for themselves. So there are lots of resources between Doug and I that you definitely can't miss. But from an institutional perspective, I will still say look at the USCIS website as well as the AILA website.
Yeah, thank you very much. And we'll obviously put all the information down below with all the links so that you can quickly navigate this, go find any support you may need. And I really want to thank you both because of this amazing work you're doing that goes beyond policy, that goes beyond your practice, but this is really part of extremely important debates that impacts all of us. I'd like to ask you one last question, because given this conversation we had, you're really mission driven. How would you describe in a few words what it means for you to be part of this policy discussion or to be practicing immigration law? What does it mean to you?
I mean, for me, it feels very meaningful, and I'm grateful to be a part of it.
For me, it means touching people's lives for generations to come. A green card today means a whole family is here, and generations to come will live here, create jobs, make a life for themselves. It is about shaping a nation one person at a time.
That's beautiful. I think I want to say what I often say. I find myself saying a lot these days, which is for anyone either living abroad who dreams of coming to America or someone who's already here trying to make it here, please know that the wide majority of the American people are with you and want you to succeed. And even though it's a really harsh and ugly time among our leadership right now, this too shall pass. And America is more than its government. America is full of people who want to be your coworkers, your neighbors, your family members. So please know that you are still welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Tahmina. Thank you, Doug. That was such an important conversation. We could obviously go on and on for hours. So please, for the audience, check their work, read their books, listen to their podcast. They're doing such an incredible job, and they're the best person to know what's going on in this country in real time. So thank you very much. Thanks for the audience, and see you for the next episode.
Thank you so much for having us. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Yes, thank you.